The iron gates of Shadow Moon territory rose before Phoenix like the jaws of some ancient beast, their twisted metal work catching the last rays of dying sunlight. She pressed one hand against her swollen belly, feeling her pup shift restlessly beneath her ribs, and tried to steady her breathing. Every step of the 3-day journey had been agony, her feet blistered and bleeding, her body screaming for rest she couldn't afford. The forest behind her held too many shadows, too many memories of teeth and claws and Marcus's final scream. "State your business." The guard's voice cut through the twilight, sharp and unwelcoming. Phoenix lifted her chin, calling on reserves of strength she wasn't sure she possessed. "I'm Phoenix Ashwood of the Cedar Ridge Pack." Her voice cracked on her pack's name. Had been her pack. Past tense. Everything was past tense now. "I seek asylum and protection under the ancient laws of sanctuary." The guard's eyes dropped to her pregnant belly, then to the dried blood on her torn clothes. His expression didn't soften, but something flickered there. Perhaps pity. Perhaps calculation. "Cedar Ridge is 3 territories away. That's a long walk for a female in your condition." "There's nowhere else to walk from." The words came out hollow. "Cedar Ridge doesn't exist anymore." She watched him process this, saw the moment comprehension dawned. News of rogue attacks had been spreading through the territories like wildfire, but experiencing the aftermath was different from hearing rumors. Phoenix knew she looked like what she was. A survivor of something that shouldn't have been survived, a ghost wearing flesh that didn't quite fit anymore. "Wait here." The guard disappeared beyond the gates, leaving Phoenix swaying on her feet. The world tilted slightly, and she locked her knees to keep from collapsing. Marcus wouldn't want her to give up now, not when she was this close. She could almost feel his hands on her shoulders, steadying her the way he had 1,000 times before. But when she reached back, there was only empty air and the evening breeze carrying the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. "Please," she whispered to no one, to everyone, to the pup doing somersaults against her ribcage. "Please let them help us." The gates groaned open 15 minutes later, revealing not just the guard but 3 elderly wolves, whose silver hair and ancient eyes marked them as pack elders. The center one, a woman whose face was a map of laugh lines and sorrow, stepped forward first. "I am Elder Miriam. You claim Cedar Ridge fell?" Her voice held the weight of centuries. 4 nights ago. Phoenix's throat tightened around the words. "Rogues. Dozens of them. Maybe more. They came at moonrise. Coordinated. Organized. Not like typical rogue behavior at all." She forced herself to continue, to paint the picture these elders needed to understand the threat. "They slaughtered the warriors first, then the elders. They were looking for something. Someone. You." Elder Miriam's statement wasn't a question. Phoenix's hand instinctively curved over her belly. "My mate Marcus. He got me out. He held them off while I ran." The memory crashed over her like a physical blow. Marcus's wolf form, magnificent and fierce, standing between her and death. His last words through their mate bond. "Run, my love. Protect our pup. Don't look back." He died so we could live. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush her. Then Elder Miriam gestured, and the other 2 elders moved closer. One of them, a male with a scarred face and kind eyes, reached for Phoenix's hand. "May I?" he asked, nodding toward the leather cord around her neck. Phoenix's fingers flew to the token hanging there, Marcus's ancestral medallion, the one thing she'd grabbed as she fled. It was old, older than their pack, passed down through Marcus's bloodline for generations. She'd never paid it much attention before. It had simply been his, warm from resting against his chest, smelling like his skin. Now it was all she had left. She lifted the cord over her head with trembling fingers and placed it in the elder's outstretched palm. He held it up to the fading light, turning it slowly, and she watched his eyes widen. "By the Moon Mother," he breathed. Miriam, look at this. The female elder leaned in, and Phoenix watched both their expressions transform from careful neutrality to shocked recognition. The third elder, who hadn't yet spoken, made a sound low in his throat that might have been awe or fear. "What is it?" Phoenix asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Every revelation lately had brought only pain. Elder Miriam traced one finger over the medallion's surface, following markings Phoenix had thought were merely decorative. "These aren't just family symbols, they're prophetic runes, written in the old tongue." She looked up, her ancient eyes sharp. "Did your mate ever tell you what they meant?" "He said they represented courage and protection, his family legacy." Phoenix's voice dropped to a whisper. "He lived up to both." "He did more than that." The scarred elder's voice held a tremor. "These runes speak of a child born of sacrifice, whose very existence will bridge the divide between warring packs. A child who will unite the werewolf kingdoms, but only if the mother survives until the birth." The world seemed to tilt again, but this time it had nothing to do with exhaustion. Phoenix stared at the medallion, at the runes she'd seen 1,000 times without truly seeing them at all. "That's why they wanted me. They knew about the prophecy." "It would seem so." Elder Miriam gently returned the medallion to Phoenix, closing her fingers around the warm metal. "Which means you're in far more danger than we initially understood. But it also means you carry far more hope than any of us dared imagine." Phoenix wanted to laugh, to scream, to do anything but stand there feeling the weight of destiny settling on shoulders already burdened with grief. She hadn't asked for this. She just wanted a simple life with Marcus, to raise their pup in peace, to grow old watching sunsets from their porch. Instead, she had prophecies and death, and a future that felt more like a trap than a promise. "Will you help me?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended. "Please, I can't do this alone." Elder Miriam's expression softened. "Child, you're not alone. You've walked through fire to reach our gates, carrying the hope of all our kind beneath your heart." She glanced at the other elders who nodded in silent agreement. "Shadow Moon will grant you sanctuary. More than that, we'll take this directly to the Alpha King himself. If anyone can protect you and your pup, it's Zayn." The Alpha King's stronghold rose against the night sky like a mountain of stone and steel, its towers reaching toward stars that seemed too distant to offer comfort. Phoenix walked between two guards through corridors that echoed with the footsteps of wolves who'd walked these paths for generations. Her feet felt disconnected from her body, moving forward through pure momentum rather than conscious will. The throne room doors swung open on silent hinges, revealing a space that stole what little breath Phoenix had left. Moonlight poured through high windows, painting everything in silver and shadow. At the far end of the hall, a figure rose from a chair carved from a single piece of dark oak. Alpha King Zayn. Phoenix had heard stories, of course. Every wolf in every territory had heard about the Alpha, who'd united 3 feuding packs through strategy, strength, and an almost legendary sense of justice. She'd expected someone intimidating, perhaps cold, definitely distant, a king in truth, as well as title. She hadn't expected him to cross the length of the throne room in long, purposeful strides and drop to one knee before her. Phoenix Ashwood. His voice was deep, resonant, carrying the weight of absolute authority tempered by something that sounded impossibly like reverence. Widow of Marcus Ashwood, warrior and hero. Phoenix's mouth opened, but no words emerged. She stared down at the top of his head. Dark hair shot through with silver at the temples, broad shoulders held with perfect posture even in this position of submission, and felt reality tilt sideways. "Alpha King, I don't—" "Your mate saved my life." Zayn's head lifted and their eyes met. The world stopped. His eyes were the color of amber held up to firelight, flecked with gold and burning with an intensity that made Phoenix's breath catch. She felt it then. The inexplicable pull that shouldn't exist. Couldn't exist. Not when Marcus's body was barely cold. Not when her heart was still bleeding from wounds too fresh to even scar. It hit her like a physical force, this awareness of him, and she saw the exact moment he felt it too. His eyes widened fractionally, his sharp intake of breath audible in the silent hall. No, no, this couldn't be happening. She couldn't feel anything. Not for anyone. Not after... Phoenix? Zayn's voice gentled, concern replacing whatever he'd been about to say. You're trembling. She was. Her entire body shook like aspen leaves in a storm. I'm fine, she lied, the words automatic and utterly unconvincing. Zayn rose smoothly to his feet, and Phoenix had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He was tall, powerfully built, with the kind of presence that made everyone else in the room fade to background noise. A scar traced the line of his jaw on the left side, and Phoenix found herself wondering. No, stop. She had no right to wonder anything about this male, to notice anything beyond whether he'd grant her sanctuary. 5 years ago, Zayn began, his voice carrying to every corner of the throne room, I fought in the border wars between Shadow Moon and the Crimson Fang Pack. I was young, reckless, convinced of my own invincibility. A muscle jumped in his jaw. That arrogance nearly cost me my life. I was surrounded, outnumbered, bleeding out in the mud. And then a wolf I'd never met, Marcus Ashwood, crashed through enemy lines and fought his way to my side. Phoenix's breath hitched. Marcus had never told her this story. She'd known he'd fought in the border wars, but he'd always deflected her questions, insisting the past was less important than their future. He held off 6 warriors while I recovered enough to fight again, took wounds meant for me, and when I asked him afterward why he'd risked himself for a stranger, do you know what he said? Phoenix shook her head, not trusting her voice. He said, because you're the kind of alpha who fights alongside your warriors instead of behind them. The world needs more males like you, leading. Zayn's expression held a grief that mirrored Phoenix's own. I never got to repay that debt, but I can honor it now by protecting what he died to save, you and your pup. Tears burned Phoenix's eyes, and she blinked furiously, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. You don't owe me anything. Marcus did what he thought was right, but that doesn't... It does. Zayn's tone left no room for argument. Phoenix, I'm not offering you basic sanctuary. I'm offering you a place of honor in this pack. In my home. You'll have the Royal Wing's best suite, access to our healers, protection from whatever threatens you. He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. And I'm assigning myself as your personal protector. No one will hurt you or your pup. Not while I draw breath. The promise hung in the air between them, charged with meaning Phoenix couldn't begin to unpack. Part of her wanted to refuse, to insist she didn't need this level of care, that she was fine alone. But she wasn't fine, and she wasn't alone. She had a pup to protect, a prophecy to survive, and enemies who'd already proven they'd stop at nothing to claim her child. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why would you do all this? Zayn stepped closer, and Phoenix's heart kicked against her ribs. Close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, smell the scent of pine and night air that clung to him. Close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from his body, offering comfort she desperately wanted and absolutely couldn't accept. Because Marcus trusted me to be the kind of alpha worth saving, Zayn said quietly. And because something tells me that you're worth every ounce of protection I can offer. Their gazes locked again, and Phoenix felt that pull intensify until it was almost painful. Guilt crashed over her in waves. Marcus had been gone less than a week, and here she stood, feeling things she had no business feeling, responding to another male in ways that made her want to crawl out of her own skin. I can't. Her voice broke. I'm not ready for. I'm not asking you to be ready for anything except rest and healing. Zayn took a careful step back, giving her space she both wanted and resented. Whatever you're feeling, whatever you need, it's yours. No expectations, no pressure. You have my word. A figure emerged from the shadows behind the throne, a male almost as tall as Zayn, with sharp features and intelligent eyes. This is Cole, my beta, Zayn said. He'll show you to your suite. Cole inclined his head respectfully. It's an honor, Phoenix. Your mate's reputation preceded him, and clearly, his choice in mate was as impeccable as everything else about him. The compliment was kind, but Phoenix barely heard it. Her pup chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick, and she gasped, one hand flying to her belly. Zayn moved before she could blink, his hand hovering near her elbow. Are you all right? Is it the baby? Just active. Phoenix managed a weak smile. Apparently, all the excitement is too much for one of us. Something in Zayn's expression softened, transformed, and for a moment, Phoenix saw past the Alpha King to the male beneath. Someone who understood loss and loneliness and the desperate need to protect something precious. Then let's get you somewhere you can both rest. Zayn gestured toward a side corridor. Cole, take her to the Moonview suite, and have healer Miriam. Elder Miriam? Phoenix interrupted. Different Miriam, Zayn said with a slight smile. Our pack healer shares the name. Have her do a full examination. Make sure Phoenix and the pup are healthy after the journey. Cole nodded and offered Phoenix his arm, which she took gratefully. Her legs had started trembling again, and only stubborn pride kept her upright. As she moved toward the corridor, she couldn't resist one last glance back. Zayn stood exactly where she'd left him, watching her with an expression that made her chest tight, and her wolf restless. It was the look of a male who'd just found something he'd been searching for without knowing he'd been searching at all. And that terrified her more than any rogue attack ever could. The morning sun filtered through the gauzy curtains of Phoenix's suite, painting everything in soft gold. She'd been at Shadow Moon for 3 weeks now, and the routine had become almost comfortable, almost being the critical word. Nothing could truly be comfortable when guilt sat like a stone in her chest every time she caught herself smiling, every time the weight of grief lifted for even a moment. A knock at her door pulled her from thoughts that had started circling the drain again. "Come in," she called, already knowing who it would be. Zayn entered with the careful courtesy he always showed, waiting for her nod before crossing the threshold. He wore simple training clothes, rather than the formal attire she'd seen him in at pack meetings, and somehow that made him even more devastating. The casual garments emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, the powerful lines of his body that spoke of a warrior king rather than a politician. "Ready for your appointment with healer Miriam?" he asked, and Phoenix tried not to notice how his voice seemed to resonate in her bones. "You don't have to accompany me every time," she said, repeating the same protest she'd made at each of the previous 4 appointments. "I'm sure you have more important things to do than watch me get poked and prodded. There's nothing more important than ensuring you and your pup are healthy." Zayn's tone left no room for argument, just as it had the previous 4 times. He offered his arm, and Phoenix took it because refusing would be churlish. Definitely not because she craved the warmth of contact, the solid strength of him beside her. They walked through corridors that still felt too grand, too permanent for someone who'd arrived with nothing but grief and a prophecy she hadn't asked for. Pack members nodded respectfully as they passed, and Phoenix tried not to see the speculation in their eyes. The widow and the Alpha King, spending every day together. Of course, people would talk. The thought made her want to crawl out of her skin. "You're tense," Zayn observed quietly. Are you in pain? Just thinking too much. Phoenix forced her shoulders to relax. It's a bad habit. Thinking about Marcus? The question should have felt intrusive, but Zayn had earned the right to ask. He spoke about Marcus constantly, weaving stories of her late mate's courage into casual conversation as naturally as breathing. It was both comforting and agonizing, being reminded that someone else valued Marcus's memory while simultaneously being pulled toward the male doing the remembering. Among other things, she admitted, the medical wing smelled of herbs and clean linen, familiar scents that should have been soothing but instead made Phoenix's stomach clench. Every examination was a reminder that her body was changing, preparing for a birth that would happen without Marcus there to hold her hand, to meet their daughter, to Phoenix. Zayn's hand covered hers where it had clenched into a fist against her belly. Breathe. She hadn't realized she'd stopped. Air rushed into her lungs in a gasping inhale, and Zayn's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand until her breathing steadied. The casual intimacy of the gesture should have felt wrong, but her traitorous body responded with warmth that spread from the point of contact outward. Healer Miriam looked up from preparing her examination table and smiled. She was younger than Elder Miriam, perhaps 40, with skilled hands and kind eyes that missed nothing. Good morning, Phoenix. Alpha King. Her gaze flickered between them with the same speculation Phoenix had seen in other pack members' faces. Shall we see how Mother and Pup are doing? The examination was thorough as always, Miriam checking Phoenix's blood pressure, listening to the pup's heartbeat with a carved wooden instrument that amplified sound, palpating her belly to assess position. Zayn stood to the side, close enough for comfort but not hovering, his presence a steady anchor. Everything looks excellent, Miriam announced. The pup is strong and active, positioned well for this stage. You're at 28 weeks now, yes? Phoenix nodded, doing the math she'd done 1,000 times. 14 weeks until her due date. 14 weeks to prepare for single motherhood, to figure out how to raise a child prophesied to unite kingdoms when she could barely unite her own conflicted emotions. The pup is very active this morning, Miriam noted, her hand still on Phoenix's belly. Can you feel... Oh, there's a strong one. Phoenix gasped as her pup delivered a kick that felt like it connected with her ribs. She'd been feeling movement for weeks now, but this was different, powerful, almost defiant, as if her daughter wanted everyone to know she was there. May I? Zayn's voice held a note Phoenix had never heard before, something almost hesitant. She looked up to find him staring at her belly with an expression that made her heart stutter. Longing, wonder, and a grief so profound it matched her own. And suddenly she remembered what she'd learned from gossiping pack members, that Zayn had lost his mate and unborn pup years ago, that he'd shut himself off from the possibility of family since that devastating loss. Phoenix didn't think. Her hand reached out and caught his, tugging him closer. Here, she said, placing his palm against the spot where her pup seemed to be practicing martial arts. Feel. The pup kicked again, hard enough that Phoenix saw Zayn's eyes widen. His hand spread across her belly, fingers gentle, and she watched emotions cascade across his face too quickly to catalog. Joy, sorrow, awe, pain. All of it raw and unguarded in a way she'd never seen from the controlled Alpha King. She's strong, Zayn whispered, his voice rough. A warrior, like her father. Like both her parents, Phoenix corrected, though Marcus had definitely been the warrior between them. She'd been a teacher before everything fell apart, more comfortable with books than battles. They stayed like that longer than appropriate, Zayn's hand on her belly, both of them mesmerized by the life moving beneath the surface. Healer Miriam discreetly busied herself organizing supplies, giving them a privacy that felt both generous and damning. When Phoenix finally pulled away, the loss of contact felt like losing a limb. Zayn's hand dropped to his side, and she watched him rebuild his walls in real time, the vulnerable male disappearing behind the Alpha King's mask. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me feel that." "Of course." Phoenix's voice sounded strange to her own ears. "You've done so much for us. It's the least—" "It's not about debts or obligations." Zayn's amber eyes burned into hers. "Don't diminish what you just gave me by making it transactional." The intensity made Phoenix's breath catch. She wanted to look away, to retreat into safer territory, but something held her pinned in place. The pull between them had been growing stronger each day, and moments like this made it almost unbearable. "I should go," she said, even though the examination wasn't quite finished. Miriam glanced up, clearly surprised. "I still need to—" "Tomorrow." Phoenix was already sliding off the table, needing distance before she did something catastrophically stupid. "I'm tired. Is that okay?" Concern creased Miriam's face, but she nodded. "Of course. Rest is important. I'll see you tomorrow? Same time?" Phoenix fled before either of them could say anything else, leaving Zayn standing in the medical wing looking like she'd struck him. The guilt that crashed over her was familiar, but now it had new dimensions. Guilt for wanting comfort from someone who wasn't Marcus. Guilt for running from the first genuine connection she'd felt since becoming a widow. Guilt for everything and nothing all at once. She made it to her suite before the tears started, and once they began, she couldn't stop them. Phoenix curled on her bed, one hand on her belly, and cried for Marcus, for herself, for the impossible situation that had no right answers, only different shades of wrong. The next morning, Phoenix woke before dawn, restless and aching from troubled sleep. Her pup had been active all night, responding to her mother's turbulent emotions with movement that ranged from gentle flutters to aggressive kicks. Finally, Phoenix gave up on sleep and wrapped herself in a thick robe before padding to the window. Shadow Moon's grounds spread below her window like a living painting. The pack's territory was vast, encompassing forests and training grounds, gardens and buildings that housed hundreds of wolves. In the growing light, Phoenix could make out figures already moving, early risers heading to training or patrol, and one figure walking alone toward the forest line. Even at this distance, she recognized Zayn's distinctive stride, the set of his shoulders. He moved with purpose, heading toward a section of forest Phoenix hadn't explored. Curiosity warred with her instinct to maintain distance, and curiosity won. She dressed quickly and followed at a discreet distance, her wolf lending her stealth despite her pregnant bulk. Zayn moved deeper into the forest, eventually stopping in a small clearing Phoenix hadn't known existed. As she crept closer, staying hidden behind a massive oak, she saw what had drawn him here. A memorial stone. It was simple, but beautiful. A natural boulder carved with names and dates, surrounded by carefully tended wildflowers. Phoenix was too far away to read the inscriptions, but she watched Zayn kneel before it with a reverence that made her chest tight. He stayed there for nearly 30 minutes, speaking too quietly for her to hear, but clearly communing with whoever the stone commemorated. When he finally rose, his expression held a peace she'd never seen on his face, as if this private ritual centered him for whatever the day might bring. Phoenix started to retreat, not wanting to intrude on such a personal moment, but a twig snapped under her foot. Zayn's head whipped toward her hiding spot, and she watched him scent the air. "Phoenix." Not a question, just acknowledgement. "You can come out." Caught, she stepped into the clearing, already preparing apologies. "I didn't mean to intrude. I saw you leaving, and I was curious, and I should have—" "It's all right?" Zayn gestured toward the stone. "Come see." Phoenix approached slowly, giving him every opportunity to change his mind, but he simply waited with that infinite patience she was coming to recognize as fundamental to his nature. When she was close enough to read the inscription, her breath caught. Marcus Ashwood. Warrior. hero, friend. His sacrifice will never be forgotten. Below that, carved in the same careful script, were two more names and dates that clearly belonged to Zayn's lost mate and pup. You put Marcus here, Phoenix whispered, her eyes burning. With your family. He should be honored, remembered. Zayn's voice was rough. I come here every dawn. I tell him about you, about how strong you are, about his daughter who kicks like she's already fighting to change the world. He turned to look at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes stole her breath. I promise him that I'll protect you both, that his sacrifice won't be wasted. Phoenix's hand flew to her mouth, trapping a sob. She'd been so focused on her own guilt, her own conflicted feelings, that she hadn't fully grasped what Zayn was doing. This wasn't about replacing Marcus or pushing her to move on. This was about honoring a fallen warrior by protecting everything he'd died to save. Zayn, her voice broke. Thank you. For this. For everything. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, and before Phoenix could process what was happening, she was in his arms. Not romantically, not seductively, just held with a gentleness that suggested she was precious, breakable, worth protecting. Her head fit perfectly against his chest, and she could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong and impossibly comforting. You don't have to thank me, Zayn murmured into her hair. Marcus was right about one thing. You are worth saving. You're worth protecting. And not just because of some prophecy or debt I owe. Because you're remarkable, Phoenix. Your strength, your courage, the way you keep fighting even when grief tries to drag you under. Marcus saw that. I see it too. Phoenix should pull away, should rebuild the walls she'd let crumble, should do anything except what she did, which was burrow closer and let herself take comfort from a male who wasn't her mate but felt like he could be. They stood like that as the sun rose fully, painting the clearing in gold and shadow, and Phoenix let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe she wasn't betraying Marcus by accepting comfort from someone else. That maybe grief and guilt didn't have to be her only companions. That maybe, eventually, she could honor her past while still having a future. When they finally separated, Zayn's thumb traced the path of a tear down her cheek. No more apologizing for things you don't need to apologize for, he said softly. You're allowed to smile, Phoenix. You're allowed to laugh, to feel joy, to live. That's not betrayal. It's survival. And it's what Marcus would want for you. Phoenix nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked back to the stronghold in comfortable silence, and for the first time since Marcus's death, the weight on Phoenix's chest felt slightly lighter. Phoenix spent the next week in a fragile peace, letting herself slowly warm to life at Shadow Moon. She completed her examination with healer Miriam, who declared both mother and pup healthy and thriving. She explored the gardens that adjoined her suite, finding solace in the riot of late summer blooms. She even attended a packed dinner, sitting at Zayn's right hand and trying not to notice how natural that felt, how the pack seemed to accept her presence at their alpha's side. But peace, she was learning, was always temporary. The warning came on a morning that started like any other. Phoenix was in her private garden, tending to a rose bush that had become her particular project, when Cole burst through the garden gate with an expression that made her blood run cold. Phoenix, you need to come with me. Now. The beta's usual composure had cracked, revealing something that looked like fear. What's wrong? But she was already moving, following Cole at a pace that made her pup protest with sharp kicks. The council chambers. Zayn wants you there. The pack council chambers occupied the heart of the stronghold, a circular room where the Alpha King met with his advisors and settled pack business. Phoenix had never been inside, and she immediately understood why the space commanded respect. The walls were lined with weapons from centuries of pack history, and the large round table at the center could seat 20 wolves comfortably. Right now, it seated 13. Zayn at the head, his most trusted advisors flanking him, and one empty chair that Cole guided Phoenix toward. The chair directly at Zayn's right hand. "What's happening?" Phoenix asked as she sat, her voice steadier than she felt. Zayn's expression was carved from granite. "We received a message. From the rogues who destroyed Cedar Ridge." Ice flooded Phoenix's veins. She'd known they might come eventually, but knowing and facing the reality were entirely different things. "What kind of message?" In answer, Zayn pushed a piece of parchment across the table. Phoenix picked it up with trembling fingers and read words that made her stomach drop. "Alpha King of Shadow Moon. You harbor what belongs to us. The pregnant widow Phoenix Ashwood carries a child prophesied to grant ultimate power to whoever controls it. Surrender her by the next new moon, or we will take her by force. Your pack will burn as Cedar Ridge burned. Every life lost will be blood on your hands. Consider this your only warning." Cade, Alpha of the Rogue Coalition. "No." The word burst from Phoenix before she could stop it. "No, I won't let that happen. I'll leave. I'll go somewhere else. You'll do nothing of the sort." Zayn's voice cracked like a whip, and Phoenix's protest died in her throat. "You're under my protection, which means this threat is against Shadow Moon itself. Cade and his rogues have just declared war, whether they realize it or not." "Alpha King, with respect." One of the council members, a grizzled male whose nameplate read Elder Thomas, leaned forward. "Protecting Phoenix could cost us dozens of lives. We need to consider whether one female and her unborn pup are worth that price." Phoenix flinched as if struck. She'd known this was coming, but hearing it stated so baldly still hurt. "That female," Zayn said, his voice dropping to a register that made everyone at the table sit straighter, "is the widow of a hero who saved my life. That pup is prophesied to unite the kingdoms, which means protecting them isn't just about honor. It's about the future of all werewolf kind. So yes, Elder Thomas, they're worth fighting for. And if you disagree, you're welcome to leave this council." Silence fell like a hammer blow. Elder Thomas paled but nodded, properly chastised. "We double her security," Zayn continued, shifting seamlessly into tactical mode. "4 guards at all times, rotating shifts, no patterns to predict. I want every entrance to the stronghold monitored, every patrol route expanded. Cole, reach out to our allies, Silver Creek and North Mountain packs. See if they'll lend warriors if it comes to war." "You're talking about mobilizing for a fight that might never come," another council member protested. "The new moon is still 3 weeks away. Perhaps we can negotiate." "There's no negotiating with rogues who slaughter entire packs," Phoenix interrupted, surprising herself. All eyes turned to her, and she forced herself to continue despite wanting to sink through her chair. "Cade didn't kill everyone at Cedar Ridge because he wanted to talk. He's violent, organized, and convinced my pup is his path to power. He won't stop until he has what he wants, or he's dead." The council absorbed this with varying expressions of concern and calculation. Zayn's hand found hers under the table, a brief squeeze that communicated approval and support before releasing. "Phoenix is right," he said. "We prepare for war, which means everyone needs to be ready to fight or evacuate civilians if necessary. Council dismissed, except Phoenix. You stay." The council filed out with troubled expressions and nervous glances at Phoenix. When the last advisor left and the door closed behind them, Zayn's carefully controlled expression cracked. "I won't let them take you." The promise held a desperation that made Phoenix's chest tight. "I don't care what it costs, what I have to do. You and your pup are safe here." "At what price?" Phoenix pulled her hand from his, standing on unsteady legs. "How many wolves will die protecting me, Zayn? How many families will lose their fathers, their sons, their brothers? Because I brought this danger to your door? That's not how this works. You didn't bring danger. Danger found you." There's a difference. Is there? Phoenix's voice rose, all her fear and guilt pouring out at once. Marcus died protecting me. Cedar Ridge burned because these rogues want my pup. And now Shadow Moon will bleed because I was selfish enough to seek sanctuary instead of... Instead of what? Zayn was on his feet now, closing the distance between them. Instead of dying alone in the woods? Instead of letting them take you without a fight? Phoenix, you did exactly what you should have done. You survived. You protected your pup. That's not selfishness. That's courage. It's not courage when other people pay the price for my survival. Then what do you call what Marcus did? The question hit like a physical blow, and Phoenix staggered back a step. Zayn pressed his advantage, his voice gentler but no less intense. He fought and died so you could live, so his pup could live. Are you saying his sacrifice was meaningless? That you should dishonor it by giving up now? Of course not, but... No buts. Marcus believed you were worth dying for. I believe you're worth fighting for. And if you run, if you try to face this alone, you're spitting on everything he did to keep you safe. Phoenix wanted to argue, to find some flaw in his logic, but her traitorous mind kept circling back to one truth. She had a responsibility to her pup that superseded everything else, including her guilt. If Zayn offered protection, could she really refuse it in some misguided attempt to protect his pack from consequences they were willing to accept? I'm scared, she admitted, her voice small. Not just of Cade, but of what I'm bringing down on all of you. Of more people dying because of me. Fear is smart. Fear keeps you cautious. Zayn's hand settled on her shoulders, warm and grounding. But don't let fear convince you that you're not worth protecting, Phoenix. Don't let it make you believe you have to face everything alone. She looked up at him, seeing past the Alpha King to the male beneath, scarred by his own losses, carrying his own guilt, but still choosing to stand and fight rather than retreat. And she realized something that both terrified and steadied her. She wasn't alone anymore. She had an entire pack standing between her and the darkness, led by a male who'd promised to protect her and meant it with every fiber of his being. Okay, Phoenix whispered. Okay, I'll stay. I'll let you protect us. Relief transformed Zayn's expression, and for a moment, Phoenix thought he might kiss her. She saw him lean closer, saw the intent flicker in his amber eyes, saw the exact moment he caught himself and pulled back. Good. His hands dropped from her shoulders, leaving cold in their wake. Then let's make sure Cade regrets ever threatening what's mine. The possessiveness in that last word should have alarmed her. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in her belly, a reminder that her body didn't care about appropriate grieving periods or complicated loyalties. Her body knew what it wanted, even if her heart was still too broken to admit the same. What do we do now? She asked, needing to focus on practical matters before she did something reckless. Now I teach you to fight. Zayn's expression shifted to something fierce and determined. You're not going to be helpless if the worst happens, Phoenix. I'm going to make sure you can protect yourself and your pup, prophecy or no prophecy. They descended to the armory, a vast underground space that smelled of oil and steel and the sweat of countless warriors. Weapons lined the walls, swords, axes, staffs, and things Phoenix couldn't even name. Zayn led her past all of it to a clear space with padded mats, clearly designed for training. I'm not exactly in fighting condition, Phoenix said, gesturing at her pregnant belly, which had grown noticeably larger even in the weeks she'd been at Shadow Moon. At 28 weeks, she was unmistakably expecting. Her center of gravity shifted in ways that made her movements awkward. Which is why we're focusing on awareness and defensive techniques, not offense. Zayn picked up 2 wooden training daggers, offering one to her. How to recognize threats, how to create distance, how to make enough noise that help arrives before you're overwhelmed. The wood felt foreign in Phoenix's hand, the weight unfamiliar despite being far lighter than a real blade. I'm a teacher, Zayn. I've never trained for combat. Then it's time to learn. His voice held no judgment, just determination. Show me your stance. What followed was an hour of the most humbling, exhausting education Phoenix had ever experienced. Zayn was a patient teacher but demanding, correcting her grip, her footwork, her posture with relentless precision. By the end, Phoenix was sweating and breathless, her pup protesting the unusual activity with increasingly aggressive kicks. Enough for today, Zayn declared, catching her before she could argue. You did well. I can barely hold the dagger correctly. But you tried. You showed up and worked past the discomfort and fear. That's more than most wolves manage their first session. Zayn's hand settled on her lower back, steadying her. We'll train every day. Short sessions. Nothing that risks you or the pup, but enough that you build skills and confidence. Deal? Phoenix wanted to refuse, to insist this was unnecessary. But the memory of Cade's threat hung over her like a storm cloud, and she couldn't ignore the relief of having some agency, however small. Deal, she agreed. As they climbed back up from the armory, Phoenix caught Zayn's arm, stopping him in the shadowed stairwell. Thank you, she said quietly, for not making me feel like a burden, for fighting for us instead of... She trailed off, unable to finish. Instead of what? Abandoning you? Zayn turned to face her fully, and in the dim light, his features were all sharp angles and shadow. Phoenix, I'm going to tell you something I haven't told anyone in years. After I lost my maiden pup, I convinced myself I was done. That I'd failed at the one thing that mattered more than being alpha, and that I didn't deserve another chance at happiness. I shut myself off from any possibility of connection because it hurt less than risking that kind of loss again. Phoenix held her breath, sensing the weight of what he was sharing. And then you walked through my gates, Zayn continued, his voice rough with emotion. Pregnant, grieving, terrified, but still fighting. Still protecting your pup with everything you had, and something in me woke up that I'd thought was dead. His hand lifted, cupping her face with a gentleness that made her eyes burn. So no, I'm not fighting for you out of obligation or debt. I'm fighting because you reminded me what it feels like to care about something beyond duty. And I'm not letting that go without the battle of my life. The confession hung between them, charged with meaning too vast to unpack. Phoenix knew she should step back, should maintain the distance that protected what was left of her bruised heart. But her body had other ideas, swaying closer until barely any space remained between them. Zayn, she whispered, his name both a plea and a warning. I know. His thumb traced her cheekbone, the touch, featherlight. You're not ready. Maybe you'll never be ready. And if that's how it is, I'll accept it. But I need you to know where I stand, Phoenix. I need you to understand that this, us, it's not nothing to me. She should say something, but the words tangled in her throat, twisted up with grief and want and guilt that had no easy resolution. So instead, she just nodded, acknowledging what she couldn't yet accept, and watched something like relief cross his features. They emerged into the main level to find Cole waiting, his expression grim. Alpha, we have a problem. Zayn's hand dropped from Phoenix's face instantly, the warrior king sliding back into place. What kind of problem? Our perimeter scouts found this nailed to a tree at the eastern border. Cole held up a piece of cloth stained with something dark. When Phoenix leaned closer, her stomach turned. Blood. And written in it, more words from Cade. The clock is ticking, Alpha King. Decide what your pack is worth. Phoenix's newfound resolve wavered under a fresh wave of fear, but Zayn's hand found hers, squeezing once before releasing. His expression had shifted to something cold and calculating, the face of an alpha who would burn the world before letting threats stand. Let him come, Zayn said quietly, his voice carrying the promise of violence. We'll be ready. And Phoenix, despite her fear, despite everything, believed him. The darkness of the cell had become Phoenix's entire world. She'd lost track of how many hours, or was it days, had passed since Cade's rogues had dragged her through those underground tunnels. The festival sounds had faded to screams, then to terrible silence, and Phoenix had known with sick certainty that wolves were dying because of her. The suppression spell wrapped around her like invisible chains, smothering her wolf so completely that Phoenix felt half dead. She'd tried to shift a dozen times, desperate to break free, but the magic held firm. Her pup kicked constantly, agitated by her mother's fear and the unnatural energy saturating the air. "Shh, little one," Phoenix whispered, one hand splayed across her belly. "We're going to be okay. Zayn will come," he promised. But as another hour crawled past, doubt crept in. What if Zayn couldn't find her? What if Cade had killed him during the attack? What if she was truly alone, about to lose everything that mattered? The sound of approaching footsteps made Phoenix press herself against the far wall. The cell door swung open, revealing Cade, a massive wolf with cruel eyes and a smile that made her skin crawl. "Comfortable, little widow?" His voice dripped false concern. "I hope you're not too distressed. After all, we need that pup healthy." "Go to hell." Cade laughed, the sound echoing off stone walls. "Such fire. I can see why both Marcus and the Alpha King found you appealing, though I suspect your appeal will diminish significantly once I claim your child and dispose of you." Phoenix's hands curved protectively over her belly. "You'll never touch my pup." "Won't I?" Cade crouched just outside the cell, his expression shifting to something darker. "That child is prophesied to grant ultimate power. Did you think I'd chase you across territories for anything less? Once it's born, I'll force a bond with you long enough to claim parental rights, then eliminate any complications." His eyes traveled over her dismissively. "You're just the vessel. Phoenix. Disposable once you've served your purpose." The words should have terrified her, but instead, they ignited something Phoenix had thought burned out. Rage, hot and fierce, flooded through her veins. She was not disposable. She was not just a vessel. She was a mother, a survivor. A wolf who'd walked through hell and kept fighting, and she was Zayn's. Whether she'd fully accepted it or not, some part of her had already claimed him just as surely as he'd claimed her. The moment that thought crystallized, Phoenix felt it. A thread of warmth cutting through the suppression spell's cold grip. It started as barely a whisper, a touch so gentle she thought she'd imagined it. But then it grew stronger, pulsing with determination and fierce protectiveness that could only belong to one male. Zayn. He was reaching for her through whatever bond had been forming between them, and despite the magic trying to smother her wolf, that connection held firm. Phoenix closed her eyes and reached back, pouring everything she had into that thread, her fear, her hope, her absolute certainty that he was coming. "I'm here," she projected with every ounce of strength she possessed. "I'm fighting. Come find me." The answering surge of love and determination nearly knocked her breathless. And woven through it, Phoenix felt something else, her pup, adding its own strength to the bond, as if the child recognized its protector and was calling him home. Cade was still talking, detailing his plans with the arrogance of someone who believed he'd already won. But Phoenix barely heard him anymore. Because through that thread connecting her to Zayn, she could feel his presence getting closer. He was hunting. And heaven help anyone who stood in his way. Zayn crashed through the rogue territory like a force of nature, his wolf given physical form. Cole fought at his right, 3 allied alphas at his left, and behind them, a coalition of warriors that had answered his call with gratifying speed. "Alpha, we're approaching the 3rd perimeter," Cole reported, his voice steady despite the blood matting his fur. They'd fought through 2 ambushes already, leaving rogue bodies in their wake. Intel suggests the fortress is another mile north. Zayn shifted to human form long enough to respond, his body thrumming with barely controlled violence. Push harder. Phoenix has been in Cade's hands too long already. We're moving as fast as... not fast enough. The words came out as a roar, and Zayn watched his beta flinch. He forced himself to breathe, to remember that alienating his allies wouldn't help Phoenix. I can feel her, Cole. She's terrified but fighting, and every second we waste is another second she suffers. Cole's expression softened with understanding. The bond's manifesting. Yes. Zayn didn't bother denying it. The entire pack would know soon anyway. Probably already suspected from how completely he'd lost his mind organizing this rescue. She's mine, Cole. My mate. My future. Mine to protect. And I failed her. You didn't fail anyone. Cade used tactics none of us anticipated. I should have anticipated everything. Zayn's fist slammed into a nearby tree, bark exploding under the impact. She was my responsibility, and I let her be taken from under my own roof. What kind of alpha does that make me? The kind who's about to tear apart an entire rogue coalition to get her back, Cole said firmly. Stop dwelling on what happened and focus on what comes next. Phoenix needs the warrior king, not the guilt-ridden male. The assessment was harsh but accurate. Zayn pulled himself together, reaching through the bond to touch Phoenix's presence again. She was still there, still fighting, and the feel of her sent strength surging through his exhausted body. Hold on, he projected, praying she could feel him. I'm coming. Just hold on a little longer. The thread pulsed with response, and woven through Phoenix's determination, Zayn felt something else. A third presence, small but impossibly powerful. The pup. It was aware, lending its mother's strength in ways that should have been impossible for an unborn child. The prophecy's real, Zayn murmured, awed despite the circumstances. Her daughter is already protecting her. Then let's make sure they both survive to see what she becomes. Cole shifted back to wolf form, his meaning clear. Talk time was over. Now came the violence. They moved as a single coordinated unit, covering the final mile in minutes. The fortress rose before them like a scar on the landscape, all sharp angles and dark stone, radiating malevolence. Rogue sentries spotted them and raised the alarm, but Zayn didn't slow. He crashed through the defensive line with Cole and the allied alphas beside him, his claws finding throats and his jaws crushing bone. Nothing would stop him from reaching Phoenix. Nothing. Phoenix felt the moment Zayn breached the fortress perimeter. The bond flared hot and bright, flooding her with his presence so intensely that she gasped. Her pup kicked in response, and suddenly Phoenix understood what was happening. The suppression spell was designed to smother adult wolves. It had never been designed to handle a pup whose power was already manifesting, who carried prophecy in its very blood. And now, with Zayn close enough that their bond amplified everything, that power was rising. Cade had left her alone in the cell, overconfident in his magical restraints. Phoenix closed her eyes and reached inward, past the spell's cold grip, searching for her wolf. For weeks, she'd been numb, disconnected, too grief-stricken to feel the full bond with her other half. But now, with her daughter's power flowing through her veins and Zayn's strength bolstering her through their connection, Phoenix felt her wolf stir. There you are, she thought, and her wolf responded with fierce joy. The suppression spell cracked. Power exploded through Phoenix's body like lightning, burning away the magical chains. Her wolf surged forward with unprecedented strength, and Phoenix let it come, welcomed it, became it. Bone and muscle shifted, her pregnant body accommodating the change in ways she'd worried might not be possible. But her pup seemed to stabilize everything, protecting itself while lending its mother the strength to transform fully. Phoenix's wolf was smaller than most, built for speed rather than power. But right now, flooded with her daughter's prophesied abilities and the mate bond's amplification, She felt invincible. The cell door's lock was basic iron, designed to hold prisoners too suppressed to fight back. Phoenix's claws shredded it like paper. She burst into the corridor beyond and immediately caught the scent of other prisoners. Wolves Cade had been holding, probably for weeks or months. She freed them systematically, her claws making quick work of locks while her newfound power burned away suppression spells. Most of the prisoners were too weak to fight, but they could run, and that was enough. Go, Phoenix commanded, her wolf's voice rough but clear. Follow the sounds of battle, our allies are here. They fled, and Phoenix turned toward the fortress's heart. Through the bond, she could feel Zayn fighting his way toward her from the outside, which meant she needed to fight her way toward him from the inside, meeting in the middle, together. For the first time since Marcus's death, Phoenix felt like a warrior again. Not a victim, not a widow, not just a mother protecting her child, though she was absolutely that, but a female wolf who'd survived hell and come out stronger, a mate fighting to reach her male, a force to be reckoned with. She moved through corridors with deadly purpose, taking down any rogue stupid enough to challenge her. Her daughter's power made her faster, stronger, more aware than she'd ever been. Phoenix could sense life forces through walls, anticipate attacks before they came, move with a grace that felt almost supernatural. And with every step closer to Zayn, the bond grew stronger. Zayn burst through the final barrier into the fortress's main hall, just as Phoenix emerged from a side corridor. Their eyes locked across the space, and the world stopped. She was magnificent. Her wolf form sleek and powerful, her eyes blazing with determination and something that looked almost like joy. Blood matted her fur, but none of it seemed to be hers, and Zayn felt pride surge through him so intensely it was almost painful. Phoenix, he projected through their bond. Zayn, she answered, and the love in that single word nearly drove him to his knees. Then Cade appeared, flanked by his remaining rogues, and the moment shattered into violence. How touching, the rogue Alpha snarled, the widow and her new mate, reunited. But you're too late, Alpha King. She's mine now, and so is that pup. I belong to no one but myself, Phoenix growled, and Zayn had never heard anything more beautiful. They moved together without planning, without discussion, their bond synchronizing every action. Zayn went high while Phoenix went low, their attacks complementing each other perfectly. The allied warriors engaged Cade's rogues while the Alpha King and his mate focused on their primary target. Cade was powerful, backed by dark magic that made his claws burn with corruption. But he was alone, fighting two wolves whose bond amplified both their strengths exponentially. Where Zayn's raw power created openings, Phoenix's speed exploited them. Where Phoenix's agility kept Cade off balance, Zayn's strength delivered devastating blows. They were unstoppable. Cade realized it too, and desperation made him reckless. He lunged for Phoenix, dark magic gathering around his claws, clearly intending to strike at her belly. At the pup he still believed he could claim. The world slowed. Zayn threw himself between Cade and Phoenix, taking claws meant for her across his ribs. Pain exploded through him, but he didn't care. Phoenix's anguished cry through the bond hurt far more than any physical wound. But before Cade could press his advantage, Phoenix's pup, that incredible prophesied child, unleashed its power fully for the first time. Light burst from Phoenix's body, pure and brilliant, forming a shield that burned away Cade's corruption where it touched. The rogue Alpha screamed, his dark magic turning against him, consuming him from within. He staggered back, and Phoenix and Zayn moved as one, delivering the final coordinated strike that sent Cade crashing to the ground. He didn't get back up. Silence fell over the hall as the remaining rogues realized their Alpha was dead. They scattered, and the allied warriors let them go. This fight was over. Phoenix shifted to human form and dropped beside Zayn, her hands immediately going to his wounds. You idiot! She sobbed, her fingers coming away bloody. You absolute idiot! You could have died! Worth it, Zayn managed, shifting human himself. You're safe. That's all that matters. Nothing is worth losing you. The confession burst from her, raw and desperate. I won't. Zayn, please don't leave me. He caught her face between his hands, ignoring the pain screaming through his ribs. I'm not going anywhere, love. These are surface wounds. I've survived far worse. But before Phoenix could respond, her body went rigid. Her hands flew to her belly, and Zayn watched her face transform from relief to shock to fear. No, she whispered. No, it's too early. Phoenix, the baby. Her voice cracked. Zayn, I think I'm in labor. Terror, unlike anything Zayn had ever felt, crashed over him. 7 months. Phoenix was only 7 months pregnant. Too early, far too early for the pup to be safe. Cole! Zayn roared, scooping Phoenix into his arms despite his injuries. Get healer Miriam here now, and prepare for emergency transport back to Shadow Moon. Phoenix's fingers dug into his shoulders as another contraction hit. Through their bond, Zayn felt every ounce of her pain, her fear, her desperate determination to keep their daughter alive. Our daughter, he realized, not just Phoenix's, not just Marcus's legacy, but his. The child he would raise and protect and love as his own, if Phoenix and fate would let him. Stay with me, he murmured, carrying her toward the exit at a run. Both of you, stay with me. We're going home. And as Cole fell into step beside them and the Allied forces formed a protective guard, Zayn prayed to every deity he'd ever heard of that home was something they'd all reach in time.